Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Kim Brown in Baltimore. Hydraulic fracturing, the process of using millions of gallons of water, sand, and chemicals to break apart shale rock to extract natural gas. This industry has grown tremendously over the past decade plus. In the year 2000, fracking was 2% of oil output in the U.S. In 2016, it accounts for over half of American oil production. There aren't definitive numbers of exactly how many active fracking wells there are, but the range is somewhere between 300,000 and 1.7 million. There's also been a lot of push and pull around this issue. The oil industry is ambitiously drilling new wells and seeking to expand into states that have not yet hopped on the fracking boom. And the reason why these states haven't hopped on this boom is in large part due to massive grassroots resistance from groups and everyday citizens who's voiced concerns about the hazardous environmental impacts of releasing massive amounts of methane gas and the contamination of groundwater. The EPA under President Barack Obama has been somewhat laissez-faire about fracking. Climate change, unfortunately, has taken a back seat in the presidential election, but Hillary Clinton was campaigning in Florida on Monday, and here's what she had to say.
Climate change is real, it's urgent, and America can take the lead in the world in addressing it, right? We here in America can develop new clean energy solutions. We can transform our economy. We can rally the world to cut carbon pollution.
She went on to remind the crowd that Donald Trump is a climate change denier who has said that climate change is a hoax perpetuated by the Chinese to undermine American industry. But is Hillary Clinton all that different in her support of the fossil fuel industry? And what does her track record have to say about the future of the U.S. and climate change under a Clinton administration? To discuss these and related topics, we're joined in studio with one of the leading voices of the environmental movement. Wenonah Hauter is the author of Frackopoly, The Battle for the Future of Energy and the Environment, and she's also the founder and executive director of Food and Water Watch Action Fund, the first national advocacy group to call on a ban on fracking. Wenonah, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so glad to be here.
So in the second debate, we heard a tiny bit about climate change, and we heard Hillary Clinton discuss the use of natural gas. She describes it as a bridge fuel, and I've heard this language come from Democrats especially. Is natural gas extracted via fracking a bridge fuel going on to renewable energies?
No, absolutely not. A bridge fuel is energy efficiency, a major job creator. And what we really need to do is shift our economy around renewables and energy efficiency. Unfortunately, the oil and gas industry and the big banks are in the process of funding and building another 40 years of fossil fuel infrastructure. That shows they don't believe it's a bridge, they believe it's the future.
So in the Democratic primary, especially during the Democratic debates between Hillary Clinton and Senator Bernie Sanders, we heard Mrs. Clinton give a lot of caveats around her support, or rather her opposition of fracking. She says, as long as it's done cleanly, as long as it doesn't contaminate water, as long as it's not releasing, poisonous gas into the atmosphere. Bernie Sanders gave an unequivocal no, he does not support fracking. But it's interesting that Mrs. Clinton laid forth these caveats, but the caveats are exactly how this process works, is it not?
That's exactly right. And we know from Mrs. Clinton's time as a Secretary of State that she's extremely supportive of fracking. In fact, our office in Brussels wrestled with a lot of the policies put out by the Obama administration, and that Secretary of State Clinton tried to use in strong-arming our allies in places, for instance, in Bulgaria. Bulgaria passed a ban on fracking, and very shortly after that, the State Department sent someone there to try to twist their arms. The same was true in many places in Europe. So the idea that Secretary Clinton isn't supportive of fracking now doesn't really pass the laugh test. I mean, of course, we know that presidential candidate Trump is very supportive of fracking and all fossil fuels and is a climate denier. But, you know, unfortunately, especially with these new WikiLeaks disclosures, we know exactly what's going on in the Clinton campaign, and it's full force forward with fracking for oil and for gas.
So in the interest of analyzing both sides, what is the Trump position on fracking and climate change?
Well, of course, Trump has never seen a dirty energy source that he doesn't love. But what I find really interesting are the people that he has picked to be his advisors on energy. He has named Harold Hamm, who owns Continental Oil, which is the largest fracker in North Dakota and responsible for a lot of the fracking that's going on there. He says that he will be his Secretary of State. Larry Nichols, who is a partial owner of Devon Energy, another very large fracker, is one of his advisors. And of course, other people who are working on his campaign have very close ties to the Koch brothers and other large energy companies like Halliburton.
Given that we've seen fracking expand tremendously throughout the Obama administration, what is going to be President Obama's legacy behind this? He has long been saying that climate change is a priority of his administration. He's taken steps in other ways to push for renewable energy and renewable energy sources, but yet the process of fracking has exploded under him.
That's right, and in fact, if we look since 2012, the amount of oil that's been fracked is 80% of the output from the United States. So the industry, many political leaders say it's all about natural gas, but it's also been about oil. And of course, under the Obama administration, the export ban that had been in place since 1973 was removed. Now that happened in a big omnibus bill, but the White House indicated that they wouldn't object to it. So we don't see any real interest in getting off of fossil fuels. And in fact, a lot of the things that people may think that the Obama administration did that would address climate change, like the Clean Power Plan, actually incentivize natural gas. So we have a lot of work to do, both under a Clinton presidency and under a Trump presidency around energy.
So there's a lot of, I wouldn't say misunderstanding, but people don't seem to grasp what exactly methane is and how much methane is released during the fracking process. And actually, according to the information from the EIA, the U.S. Energy Information Administration, they say that energy emissions are at their lowest point since 1991. Carbon emissions are at their lowest point since 1991. And one would be inclined to hear this and think that that's very good news. But when we factor in methane to this equation, what do these numbers really mean?
Right, well, it is complex. First of all, when you look at emissions from that far back, we know that we had a major recession, so emissions are lower. Methane basically is natural gas. Natural gas is methane. And what's so frightening is that EPA, that the different agencies that look at climate change, they look at a 100-year time frame. It is true that carbon stays in the atmosphere a long time and it's very damaging. But methane in the short term is a much more potent greenhouse gas, almost 100 times. And that's the first 20 years after it's emitted. We all know that we need to do something immediately about reducing emissions, getting into renewables and energy efficiency. If we are turning to methane, we are sentencing our climate to more problems, because in the short term, methane is as bad as coal, if not worse, and there's more and more scientific evidence coming out about this, like a groundbreaking study from Cornell that was done by Bob Howarth and Tony Ingraffio.
And even the big methane leak out in California that had people locked out of their neighborhood for a series of weeks. It was, you know, a clear gas that you can't see. I remember seeing the pictures, the aerial shots of this empty neighborhood and thinking, well, what's wrong? Well, they're having a big methane leak. They can't go home.
Right, these storage facilities are very, very dangerous. There are many of them around the country, and they suffer from a lot of the problems of aging infrastructure. And what happened in California was a blowout, much like the BP horizon.
How about that? So let's talk about where fracking is winning and losing on the state level, because as I mentioned, that the EPA doesn't seem to have a lot of interest in trying to regulate. In fact, it seems that some of the EPA's previous estimates of how much methane is being released into the atmosphere is actually lower than what they had originally thought. But there have been some moratoriums in states. Some states have flat out banned fracking. Where is fracking losing its war across the country?
Well, one thing is that EPA has some new rules under the Obama administration that are focused on reducing methane emissions. But shockingly, they grandfathered in all of the existing infrastructure, and we know that there are massive leaks in the infrastructure, and there's a lot of scientific evidence of that now. Now, the movement against fracking, I think, is the countervailing force against all of this misinformation from the federal government. And I think it's pretty exciting, actually, that fracking became an issue in the fight between Clinton and Sanders. We wouldn't have seen that happen if there hadn't been a strong movement. So all across the country, we see people, organizations, grassroots groups really fighting to stop the oil and gas industry. There are more than 500 local moratoriums and bans. New York had a very exciting ban that passed a couple of years ago as a result of a very well put together campaign. Maryland has a moratorium, and of course there's a huge movement in Maryland coming back to win a ban this year from the legislature. Florida is making a lot of progress. More than 16 jurisdictions in Florida have taken some have done something about fracking, either a moratorium or a ban that represents more than 70% of the population. And we've stopped bad legislation that would have let fracking move forward. All across the country, in the 30 states that face fracking, we are seeing people get together. We see the big pipeline fightbacks across the country. I think it's really exciting what's happening in North Dakota with the Dakota Access Pipeline and the leadership of indigenous people at Standing Rock. So I do believe that there is a whole movement that is going to turn back the oil and gas industry and their other allies. What we're going to have to do after the election, no matter which candidate wins, we're going to have to immediately hold the winner accountable. We can't have any of this supporting of weak measures, talking about market mechanisms that are going to fix the problem. Things like trading. What we really need are mandates against fossil fuels, and we need to really build the movement for renewable energy and energy efficiency. That could start in states like Maryland, actually, because when you look at Maryland's renewable energy mandate, it's very weak. And in fact, in 2015, the largest renewable energy source was black liquor from dirty paper processing. Wow. So there's lots of room for people to get involved in their community, lots of ways that we can begin to really change the politics. And I think it really begins with holding our elected officials accountable.
And truthfully, in some circles, depending on what side of the aisle you find yourself regarding this issue, there's pushback against politicians. Hillary Clinton is experiencing some of this when she said that she is against the use of coal, and this could actually cost her in Ohio, which is a coal and fracking state. So how do we bring more people to the understanding about that? This is the time to take action on these fossil fuels and to either not burn them, to keep them in the ground, even when it's maybe not politically expedient for elected officials to do so.
Well, I think a lot of it is about campaigns for real life policies that improve people's lives. And I think that's why in some states we've really been successful in bringing forth a movement to stop fracking. Now, obviously, we have to do this in a broader way. And I think part of it is reworking our economy. We shouldn't be in a place where we're heating up the planet or we have people who are out of work because coal is no longer environmentally sustainable. We need to create the kind of policies, the fair economic policies that allow us to buy coal workers out if they're losing their jobs. I mean, we have to be really expansive in our thinking, and we know there are lots of people suffering across this nation from the economic policies that have been instituted by Democrats and Republicans. And what we need to do is start having a real look at what policies are going to allow us to really have an environment that gives people what they need to survive, or whether it's all going to be about greed and money. And I think it really begins locally and at the state level. And I know at Food and Water Watch Action Fund, we're really looking at the 2018 elections. We really need to begin to help put people in office who want to move forward on all sorts of progressive issues. And we have to be more active at the state level, because we are facing in 2020 redistricting. And we know that that's how the districts are cut. Who goes to Congress? Why do we have such an out of touch, morally bankrupt Congress in so many ways because of how those districts were cut.
Gerrymandering.
Yeah, so we have to look at these issues in a very broad way, and we have to hold accountable the people we elect, whether they're Republican or Democrat.
Who are some good politicians to watch? Who do you feel is getting the issue and concurrently taking action and moving on the issue?
I think we do have some members, Congressman Pocan from Wisconsin, Jan Schakowsky from Illinois. I mean, we have a good group of progressive legislators, but it's not enough. And we have too many Democrats in states like Pennsylvania or Colorado, where there are Democratic governors like Governor Wolf or Governor Hickenlooper, who has been discussed as someone who might serve in the Clinton administration. They have basically given the green light to fracking. We really have to expect more. And I know one of our big asks before President Obama goes out of office is that he actually meet with the impacted people from who live near oil and gas operations. 15 million people, in fact, we know more now, live within a mile of an oil and gas operation. They're suffering from all sorts of health problems, water pollution problems, and we've never been able to get the president to even meet with these people. And in fact, the water investigations that were going on in places like Pennsylvania, Texas, and Wyoming were closed down before his last election battle. So we need politicians to really pay attention to what's going on, and I really hope that President Obama is going to actually do what he says and pay attention to climate change. Because the way I look at it, with climate chaos, of course, the poorest among us, people of color, those are the people who suffer the most, although we can expect all sorts of repercussions if we reach a tipping point and our climate really changes. We want to take action. We're not going to be able to solve all of the other problems in our society, in our world, if our climate goes too. So I think it should be a first-tier issue. It should be what these candidates are talking about instead of the politicking that's going on.
Wenonah Hauter, she is the founder and executive director of Food and Water Watch Action Fund, also the author of Frackopoly. Wenonah, we appreciate you stopping by today. Thanks a lot.
So glad to have been here.
And thank you for watching the Real News Network.